condition changed me a lot. Not only did I learn a lot about the female body and the menstrual cycle, I also learned that the complaints that I had with my own menstrual cycle were not normal. And after a process of 1.5 years of going in and out of doctor's appointments and getting sent home time after time, and with all the research that I've done and the people I've spoken to, I finally got the diagnosed PMDD. So I will not bore you with any details about the condition, but what I will tell you is that I got lucky. And you might think 1.5 years is a very long process, how is that lucky? But if it wasn't for my research and all of the new things I've learned, it probably would have taken me a lot longer to get this diagnosed. Because on average it takes 7 to 8 years to diagnose PMDD. As women, we are rarely educated on our bodies. And without any knowledge, we don't know what is normal and what is not when it comes to what's happening to our bodies. So we have to go to medical professionals, who we are led to believe know more about our bodies than we do. And we do so with blind trust and faith that the tests they order and the way they treat us and the medicine they prescribe are designed and based on evidence. And that evidence is made to help us. But what if I told you that the medical science developed over the past centuries has been almost exclusively based on half the population, the male population, and that our system is structurally failing into getting the care that women need and deserve? And there's a few factors that play a role in this, and one of them is the perspective of the doctor. Not just for doctors, but in our society in general, there is this belief that women are overly emotional, which is rooted in centuries of stigma, and it influenced the way the doctors treat us. But you don't have to take my word for it. I've talked to countless of women, and they all kind of told me the same. I don't feel listened to, I don't feel taken seriously, and as a result they wait longer and longer until they involve medical professionals. Sometimes they even say that they present themselves differently so they will look as sick as they are feeling, otherwise they will not be believed. In my research I talked to a general practitioner, and he told me a story about one of his patients, who was a woman, and she kept coming back to his clinic week after week with all kinds of vague complaints. And he told me honestly that he thought she was annoying and complaining, and maybe that she was even doing it for the attention, because every time he couldn't find anything. But he referred her to a specialist anyway, and another one after that, and another one after that. And after seeing about 7 to 8 specialists, they still didn't find anything. But the woman kept coming back to his clinic, so he said to her, let's make a deal. If I send you to the best specialist in the country, then you will, and he can't find anything either, then you will not be back here every single week. And so they did, and the specialist couldn't find anything, but the woman came back to the clinic. And before the doctor could even tell her the outcome of the specialist, and she told him, oh doctor, my leg hurts so much, and as kind of a spontaneous response, he didn't even mean it that seriously, he said, well, let's make a scan then. And they found out she had a massive tumor in her leg that was causing all of these vague kind of complaints. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because if this patient would have been a man, she probably would have been diagnosed way earlier. And that is, first of all, because he wouldn't have got to go back to the general practitioner 20 times before being referred to a specialist, but probably would have been already after 1 or 2 times. And probably the specialist he would see first would have already figured out what was wrong. And that is because the female body is still a huge mystery to many parts of science and medical science. Just like the rest of the world, the medical world is and was dominated by this perspective of the old white men. And they used the male body as a prototype of the human body. Therefore, the female body was seen as a smaller version of the male body, maybe with breasts and lacking a penis, but they assumed that what would work for male would also work for female. And this also meant that all of the research was done by and for men. Nowadays it takes years for a drug to go from an ID to being tested on cells in a laboratory, to animal testing, to clinical trials on humans, and then finally going through this entire approval process before your doctor can prescribe it to you. But more and more often, women come to their doctors with complaints that are actually side effects of their medicine. And 33% of them ends up in the hospital. So why are we discovering these side effects after that entire process the drug has been through? Well, it turns out the cells they use in the laboratories are male cells, and the animals they use for animal testing are male animals. And the clinical trials have been almost exclusively done on men. But even though the rules now have changed and the clinical trials are forced to test on both men and women, they don't really pay attention to the differences between the reactions of the drug between the male and the female. So what that basically means is that when 9 out of 10 people have side effects, of 9 out of the 10 people who have side effects are women, they don't register that. They will just say 10 people had side effects. This also is the case for certain diseases, and the best example of that is heart disease, which is the #1 killer for both men and women around the world. But more women than men die within their first year of having a heart attack. And this is because the image we have of heart attack is completely based on the experience that a man has. You've probably seen it once in a movie, a white man, middle-aged, who complains of crushing chest pain. And we call this typical. But when a woman has a heart attack, she is more likely to complain of something just not feeling right, or being so exhausted lately, or not being able to catch her breath. And in medicine, they call this atypical, even though, as I mentioned, women do make up half the population. And it's not just heart disease that presents differently on men and women. Also strokes, diabetes, cancer, ADHD or autism, and so on. To make a very long story short, because our society and the medical world is so based on men, there's too little understanding for women. So A, we don't know enough about certain diseases on women and the effects and side effects of drugs on women. And B, the knowledge that we do have is not enough applied. And the reason for this is that this issue is simply not a priority in our society. It is not mandatory to have this topic in medical education, which means that the students there, who are our future doctors, don't learn about these kind of things. There is also a huge lack in funding. We need more awareness among researchers, doctors, students, and policymakers because this is a huge problem we cannot ignore any longer. The Gender Gap Index is a scale for gender inequality among 165 countries. And last year the Netherlands was placed on number 35. But when it comes to health, the Netherlands is in place 135, which is almost at the bottom, which I think is unacceptable. Equal health is a right, and we should treat it as one. The process of my professional expedition hasn't been as empowering as my personal expedition was, and at times it would really make me feel desperate and even scared. It makes me really sad that when my mom, who has a chronic illness, goes to the doctor and gets referred to a psychologist instead of treating her pain. And it scares me deeply that maybe one day, me, one of my sisters, or one of my female friends gets sick and can't get the care they need. And there are already some people who are making a change in this. Some doctors and initiatives, which is truly amazing. But it's not going fast enough. And at this rate, it's going to take decades for a change to be made. But we all have a role in making a change. We cannot just leave this at the hands of the old white men in our society. But I do have faith that we can. I mean, look at our world. We launch Teslas into space, we buy iPhones with 3 cameras, and we've developed a vaccine at a fast pace in the pandemic. I think now it's time to solve the mystery of women's health. Thank you.